Ladies and gentlemen, I'm Anthony Leong. Welcome to Anthology. Today we're exploring a story about Area 51. This is a story based on an experience that I had back in 2020 where I was taken in a vision by God into Area 51. What I saw? Well, we're going to get into that in this video. But before we do, if you enjoy Anthology and you would like more from me, visit the link in my bio. You'll be taken to anthonyjamesleong.com where you'll find one-time support options as well as a patron tier. Monthly patrons gain access to my dream journal, Knock Tiffany, which is able to be found on my website. There, I occasionally share dreams I've had, break them down, and explain how I arrive at their interpretations. Now then, without further ado, let's get into the story. In 2020, I was working in the landscaping and construction field. During that time, I myself was bidding projects, getting the projects, and designing them, building them myself. I was running a small business. And in the spring of 2020, I had a project that I was working on in a city that was local to me, and it was a decent sized project. So, day in and day out, we were, myself and a couple other guys, we were at the job site and, just continuing to do our thing. Well, one day, and if you've ever been in the construction industry, you know that there are these days where you are tasked to do something that becomes very automatic. For example, maybe your job for the day is to scoop mulch into a wheelbarrow and walk the wheelbarrow over into a certain place and dump it and come back and fill it back up and go back and dump it. And so you could see how that could become very automatic after 5, 6, 7 hours of doing that. So I was in a process where I was in a bobcat and I would go down into the backyard and I'd scoop the dirt and I'd come back up the hill and I'd dump it into the trailer, and I just kept doing that all day. The reason I'm bringing this up is because there are different brainwave states that you can enter into, and it's not something that I practice moving into, gamma or theta or whatever, but through certain practices and through, differences of cognitive necessity, your brain moves from one state of being to the other. It's kind of like right now I'm using my computer, and so CPU is going, and there's a lot going on in the computer, but once I'm done with my system here and I let the computer go, oftentimes it'll just go into a different state of being. It'll go asleep. Same thing with us, right? So when I was moving this dirt back and forth and back and forth and back, it became almost automatic. And because of that, I was able to not have such a cognitive load on what I was doing right there, but I was rather able to move into this kind of passive place where I could be thinking deeply about other things outside of what I was doing because it was kind of low risk and I had a groove and I was working with the machine well. And so that's the backdrop. The reason I bring that up is because many times in spiritual experiences, a person will have to be in a specific state of being in order to receive certain kinds of experiences from God. And that's why I believe Jesus really drove home, hey, pray, hey, fast. When you fast, you actually move into a different state of being and you become more sensitized to spiritual activities, spiritual experiences from God. Just the matter of fact. So in this state, I was I got into a rhythm and I moved into a place of meditation in my heart. And that's where meditation takes place. Meditation takes place in your heart. So I was able to still focus with my mind, but I was meditating in my heart on God. And this was after doing this for hours in the day. And this is where we get into the vision. And I set the whole backdrop here so you understand, where I was internally in order to receive this vision. Because many times in life we get distracted, we are so busy with the stuff out here, and we can't actually receive anything from God because we're distracted. And so I'm coming up to my trailer and I'm about to dump the dirt into my trailer. And I lift up the bucket from the bobcat and it's starting to come up. And as it starts to come up and I'm moving the handle so that I can dump it, a couple feet off the ground, all of a sudden, I am taken into a vision. Now, like I had said, I was already in a meditative state. I was meditating on God. I was thinking about God. I was mulling over the scriptures and prophecies and really starting to just engage with God in my heart. And out of that, this vision came. When I entered into this vision, it was it was as if everything that I was seeing became fuzzy, it became cloudy. I'm talking about, like, my bobcat, my trailer, everything became cloudy, and it kind of started to fade a little bit, and then something more concrete started to appear in front of that vision, or in front of that sight. And when I entered into the vision, the thing that I knew immediately is I'm flying through the air. Like, immediately I enter this vision and I'm flying through the air. And I'm able to look down and it's as if I was a drone. It's as if I was had the vantage point of a drone and I was just flying. And I recognized I was in some kind of like desert area. Something arid, semi-arid. If you were looking from my perspective down, you would see sandy looking ground and like little green patches that are probably bushes or trees or plants, but arid was the environment. And I thought, wow, this is so interesting. I said, what's going on? What am I seeing here? And my perspective in the vision moved from looking down at the ground kind of to looking forwards. And I saw this mountainous type of terrain. And I started flying closer and closer to it. Well, the closer I got to it, I started to become nervous that I was just gonna hit it because in this vision, I didn't have control over myself. I was like a passive viewer in my own body. Now, I don't believe I was in my body in the vision. I believe God took me in a vision. I don't think he actually took me out of the bobcat. But what I'm saying is I didn't have control over myself in the vision. So I'm going towards this mountainous looking area, and I start going from horizontal, parallel with the ground, and I start diving down into the mountain. And as I'm getting closer and closer, I'm in the vision. I'm like, whoa! And all of a sudden, I'm coming close to the mountain, and I go right into it. If you've ever seen the movie uh, Black Panther, they're flying in an aircraft and they're about to like run into either forest or a mountain or something, and they like go through some sort of portal almost, and they enter into Wakanda, right? This whole other world. Well, it was kind of the same thing, not that it was a portal, but that I was flying through this mountain, and instead of hitting it, I went right through it. And immediately after I went into it, I was in this kind of like like uh, medical laboratory facility. That's kind of what the feeling was. Everything was really bright and clean and simple. Like, there wasn't a bunch of stuff. It was like simple architecture. The ceilings were kind of low. It was kind of low, and there were people walking around. There were people going to do different things, and I remember the and maybe the ceilings weren't low immediately, but when you went up some stairs, the ceilings looked kind of low. So it was like a medical facility. That's kind like a medical industrial facility. Everything was well lit, clean, like kinda what you would feel in a hospital, but it wasn't a hospital. It was more of um, it felt like it was research oriented. It's just what it felt like, and I saw people walking around, and this is the weird part. I saw people walking around, and I could see them, but they couldn't see me, and I knew that they couldn't see me because they were just walking past me, so the feeling was really weird. If you've ever seen the old Harry Potter movies where he has the, invisibility cloak on, he can see through the cloak, and he can see other people, and they can't see him, but he knows that they can't see him, but he knows that he can see them. The feeling is really weird. So it was like that, and I was there, and I thought, "What is going on? Where am I?" You know, that was my thought, "Where am I?" And when I thought that, I just knew I'm in Area 51. When that thought came to me, I'm in Area 51, I started to feel a little bit sick. I'm like, "Oh god, what am I doing here? And why can't they see me, and why can I see them, and what am I doing here?" And then right after that, I don't remember how I got to this next room. It wasn't like I went through a hallway and went through a door. It wasn't like that. It was like I was just suddenly in like a type of showroom. It's the best way I can describe it. It was like a showroom where the purpose of it would be to present like the newest advancement or the newest technology or the newest update or whatever. It was like a showroom. And while I was there, I saw three different technologies that were being presented. And I'll give them to you in a chronological order. So the first thing I saw was this little robo dog, and it had like a visor looking thing, like it didn't have any eyes, so it was like a visor, and it had little ears, and it had the shape of, you could tell it was a dog, right? And it had a little tail pointing up, and it just, beep, 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 and it looked like a little dog. And I was looking at it, and I thought, oh, that's so kind of quaint, cute, simple. Like, I wonder what it's a dog, like, what is it, for? And I suddenly saw it go from being on all fours to, as it moved into its hind legs, its back legs, it simultaneously unfolded. Okay. Now, I don't exactly know the physical properties that would allow it to do this, but as it went to its back legs, it started to unfold. And it went from being this little, you know, 2.5 foot dog maybe to this 7 to 8 foot bear. It was a bear. And it went from looking cute and simple and innocent. And as it moved into its back legs, it became this 7, 8 foot tall, mechanical, evil looking, because the eyes were red, evil looking bear. And it was huge. And it had the paws, and it was standing on its back legs. And somehow, this is what I knew when I saw it, somehow it didn't lose any of its density. Like you would imagine this 2 foot thing, if you're a 90s baby, if you remember those toys you get at like Toys R Us, and it was like a little spike ball, and then you'd throw it, and the spike ball would kind of, it would grow out, and then as the gravity would take effect, it would shrink back down. But the thing is, the density would change because, of course, according to like normal physics, as you expand a thing like that, it becomes more brittle. Like, it goes from being dense into being kind of like spread apart, and it's easier to break and stuff like that. But what I saw here was when it went from this tiny little 2 foot dog into this 7 to 8 foot bear, it didn't lose any like density. Like the bear was like strong, thick. It was like it wasn't brittle. And that didn't make sense to me when I saw it. The reason I'm kind of driving this home, it didn't make sense, like how this little tiny thing could almost unfold into being this much bigger 3, 4 times the size in terms of height, but it didn't lose any of, like, the density of it. And I knew this bear that had come from a dog, I knew it was like a war weapon. Like, it was intended for violent purposes. That's what I knew. It was intended for violent purposes. So I saw that. And then the next thing I saw was a human person, just looked like me, right? It looked like me, had skin, human skin, just looked like a person. And I was looking at it. And I had no idea that it was technological, right? That didn't dawn on me at all. I'm like, oh, it's a person. And then suddenly the skin started to fold back. It folded backwards, and like all of the skin somehow disappeared. It like folded, it had a mechanism in it where it folded like inside, backwards, and in or something, and the skin was gone. The appearance of the skin had just disappeared. It had been, it's like a, you know, it's like the opposite of a cocoon where the worm opens up and then the butterfly comes out. It's like the opposite where the outside is inverted inwards. It's like a sock, you invert the sock and now the logo's out here and then you reinvert it and now the logo's inside the sock. It was like that. And when that folded backwards and the skin disappeared, it was a robot. And it literally reminded me of the old not Transformers, um, Get to the Chopper, that movie, Terminator. It reminded me of that, where the skin was there and then it peeled back and then the face looked like a Terminator type face. And I also knew that this technology was for violent purposes. Now, I can't say for war because it didn't feel like it was like it felt like these were prototypes, like there wasn't, millions of them, but I just knew they were intended for violence and, like, they were programmed for violence, and there was just evil was behind it. I could just feel it was evil. So even though it was a technological advancement, like, it was highly technological what they were able to do, but it was intended for the purpose of violence, okay? Then I saw the 3rd thing. And the third item stood apart. It stood apart because of its appearance, of its form, and its usage. In my mind, when I first saw it, I'm like, oh, that third item is kind of distinct from the first two because you have the animated object, which is a dog becoming a bear, transforming into a bear. You have a human transforming into um, uh, a robot, a humanoid kind of thing. And so, those are both animated living beings outside of being dogs are living and humans are living, right? So this third thing kind of stood apart, at least I thought. And the third thing I saw was a cloud, and it was floating off the ground, probably, I don't know, 3 to 4 feet, probably more closer to 3.5 feet. It was just floating there. And from a distance, it just looked like a cloud, like somehow, they were able to create this like a cloud, a little one, and it was just able to hover, like it wasn't floating off, it wasn't like vapor, it wasn't floating off into the atmosphere. It was able to just hover there. I thought, "Oh, that's interesting." But then the more I looked at it, the more I realized it wasn't water particles. It was it was um it was like digital particles. So the cloud from a distance looked like a regular water cloud. And then the more I looked at it, the more I realized it was a bunch of pixels, like a whole bunch of little digital. It was a digital cloud. And I thought, wow, that's so weird. I thought, what is that? And then as I began to look at it, I recognized, oh, that's not a cloud. That's actually a portal. Now, when I recognized that it was a portal and it had the appearance of looking natural, but it was made of digital pixels, I knew that the intention was to be able to set up this cloud in one physical location and set up like its paired, twin cloud or a paired cloud that was paired to it in a different physical location, and to send something through this pixelated cloud and into it and out in a different physical location. That's what I knew. And I knew all three of these things were not, they were all technologies. Okay. So, like for the third thing, a portal, it wasn't like it wasn't like seance, astral projection, wizardry kind of portal that can be created. It was actually technologized. Now, where the technology came from, that's a different question, but I do know that it was like digital, technologized, pixelated cloud that looked natural but was actually a portal. And the intention was to be able to sync two of them together, put them in different physical locations, and send something through. Now, when I saw that final thing, my vision ended, and I was back in my awareness, in my consciousness, in the bobcat. And during the entirety of this vision, I was completely unaware in my consciousness that I was in a bobcat. So this led me to believe later on that actually I had entered into a trance. So I've actually experienced a couple of trances in my life. And according to the Bible, a trance is oftentimes the mechanism by which God brings people into visions. So basically you'll enter into a trance, and then when you're in a trance, you'll have a vision. This happened to Peter in the book of Acts. This happened in the Old Testament multiple different times. But basically, a trance is when your body is put into like a paralyzed state, similar to being asleep, right? And a trance is basically the method by which God puts a person while they're awake into a state that is similar to being asleep. And in that place, a person will oftentimes receive a vision, just like when a person's sleeping, they'll receive a dream. So a trance is basically the state of being while you're awake that allows you to have a vision, whereas that state of being while you're asleep allows you to have a dream. Okay. And a huge part of being in a trance is that what happens is that your consciousness is detached from the physical world. Just like when you're sleeping, you're not aware of everything that's happening in the physical world. In fact, you're unaware of it. Your consciousness is detached from the physical. And the same thing is true about a trance. And then that's why in this vision, I was totally unaware that I was in a bobcat. So the vision ended. I became aware I was in a bobcat, and I felt very sick. I felt very sick, ill, because I'm like, what did I just see? Why did I just see that? It felt like I invaded private space. I'm working and there's a bobcat that's making noise, and there's dirt that's there. I don't know how long I've been gone. It was hot in the bobcat. There was so many things going on. So I just continued to work after, dump the dirt and continue to work. But I wanted to go back and break down a couple of these things, right? So let's break down a couple of the factors or the details in this vision within a trance so that there can be greater clarity about what this is. And then I want to actually bring up something that I listened to on Joe Rogan not too long ago, where he had Aaron Rodgers on his podcast. And Aaron said something that when I listened to this podcast, it like shook me. I was like, whoa. So I'll get into that in a second. So notice this, right? Notice that the the appearance of each thing was semi-natural, at least the human in the cloud, right? So the dog, obviously, it's not something that is foreign to the ability for a human being to understand. We see dogs all the time. So when you see a robot dog, you're like, oh, that's obviously a dog. Like it's a robot, but it's obviously a dog. So it's not outside of, it's not it's not an alien, right? It's not this strange looking creature there. It has the appearance of something that we would see in a normal day-to-day basis. Cool. Second thing is the same thing. Looks like a normal person. Cool. Third thing is the same thing. It looks like a cloud. Now, clouds don't just hover, unless you're watching an anime, they don't just hover 3 to 4 feet off the ground, right? I mean, fog does, but clouds really don't. So the appearance of it looked like something that was something you see every day, but the proximity or its location, its locality, that's what was odd in the beginning. Like, oh, there's a cloud, but it's down here. So that's what was odd about it, right? So there was really nothing odd about the second thing, which was the human. There was something, sort of odd about the first one, was that it was a dog, but it was a robot. Third thing that was odd was that it was a cloud, but it was like 3 to 4 feet off the ground. Um, Until you took a closer look at the cloud. Then you realized, oh, it's pixelated. It's digital. This cloud is digital. The next thing I want to say is that all three of these items were technological. The first two items I knew for certain, based on the appearance of the bear and the robot humanoid, I knew for certain that they were intended for the purpose of violence. That was without a question, without a doubt, the evil. I mean, I don't know how else to say it. It just the evil, the terror. There was like it was a terror. It was like they were monsters. It was terrifying. So I knew that for certain. And this third thing, this cloud, this digital cloud, who knows for what purposes that could be utilized. I mean, you could use that for so many different in so many different cases, right? So, and at the time, I didn't know much about I still don't know much about Area 51. Now with in the age of disclosure and people talking about aliens and government operations and projects and all these things and Bob Lazar and all of that, right? People talking about Area 51. I don't know the ins and outs of it. I couldn't tell you all that. All I know is that I was taken there and I saw these three pieces of technology. This was in 2020. Now, let's get to the Joe Rogan episode with Aaron Rodgers. I'm listening to this episode and they're talking about a bunch of stuff, and I enjoyed the conversation. But Aaron Rodgers starts to ask Joe, he's like, um, if you could go anywhere. And I think they're talking about going anywhere in the context of astral projection. No, remote viewing. Interesting, right? So they're talking about learning to remote view. And they're talking about how, the CIA hires remote viewers to find things and to carry out projects. And this is documented. This is not, classified information. They hire remote viewers to do these things. And these people are psychics. Um, some of them might be sorcerers, wizards, warlocks, witches. But regardless, they're practicing remote viewing, which is basically the counterfeit practice to what I'm telling you, being taken in a vision. People do this and they try to engage in this spiritual power through their own will. And the Bible calls that witchcraft, sorcery. Because in this instance that I went to Area 51, I didn't try to go there. I wasn't even, I was just meditating on God. God placed me in a trance and God took me in a vision into that place. Okay. I didn't will myself to go there. Very, very different. This isn't something that you just will to be, because you enter into a space that you actually, if you enter through your own human will, you don't have authority there. Just like I said in a previous video about a witch that I encountered as she astral projected outside of her body. She had no authority being there. And if go watch that chapter of Anthology, it's really good. Anyway, Aaron Rodgers and Joe Rogan are talking about remote viewing, and Aaron Rodgers says, Joe, where would you go? Where would you, if you could go anywhere remote viewing, where would you go? And Joe's like, Area 51. And Aaron Rodgers is like, yeah, same. I'll go to Area 51. And then Joe's like, yeah, it'd be so awesome. And then Aaron Rodgers says something like, you have to practice. It's like, what do you mean? What are you saying, Aaron? So he says he says that, and then Aaron Rodgers talks about this next portion, which I thought was really interesting. He said, have you heard of the astral guards? They're talking about astral projection, and they're talking about remote viewing. They're talking about Area 51, and they're going there, right? And so Aaron says, have you ever heard of astral guards? And Joe's like, what's an astral guard? And Aaron says, well, it's people who are astral guardians of Area 51. And then Joe says, well, what do you mean? Like, they're guards there, and then while they're guarding the place, they're astral projecting? And Aaron's like, no. These are people who are hired to astral project. And once they go into the astral plane, they actually protect Area 51 and they guard it. And Joe goes, whoa. Kind of like Joe does. Whoa. See, can I do it better? Whoa. Yeah, that was better. With the face too, the eyebrows. And he says, well, what are they guarding it from? And Aaron says, well, other people who are astral projecting to try to go in. And then Joe's kind of, he's a little skeptical about that, which they're just talking about remote viewing, the CIA hiring remote viewers. And then he's like, I don't know about that one. Anyways, totally understandable. But Aaron Rodgers says that there are people who are basically commissioned to astral project to keep people from entering into Area 51 through the astral plane, he calls it, right? Well, when he said that, and I heard that, it kind of made me tremble a little bit, because I'm like, if they were there, I bypassed all them. And here's the difference. People who astral project, they're dealing in a plane within the spiritual realm that I would categorize as the second heavens. The second heavens. And that's that plane in which there are princes, there are powers, there are demonic entities. There's a whole host of things that exist in that realm of existence, that plane, that makes that place very dangerous. And that's why people who say that they practice astral projection, they feel like they're about to die when they do it. People who enter into that place through ayahuasca, DMT, psilocybin. I mean, I used to do all that kind of stuff. And I can testify that, especially when I did DMT, I did a decent amount and I thought I was about to die right before I broke into that realm. And I saw a little elf-looking thing, and I saw that much of our physical reality was actually made up of formulas and mathematics, and that's what I saw when I was experiencing that. Now, I separate that from being true, but that was a real experience, and this is what people don't understand. You can have a real experience, and then you have to separate it a category further. Okay, this really happened. Now, is the nature of this encounter true, or is it false? And that's what people don't understand. They don't understand that you can have a real experience, but the spirit experience itself, based on the source, is either true or false. In John in the Bible, he says, test every spirit. In other words, you can come to a place where you discern through spiritual exercise of your senses to be able to determine whether a voice that you're hearing is from God or not, whether an experience you had is originated from God or not, and that this is really important, especially when it comes to preternatural experiences, encounters, trances, visions, dreams, all that kind of stuff. So Aaron says this, and then I realize, oh yeah, so in that world, they have to fight and they gotta, they gotta do a bunch of stuff. But if you are in union with God and you have favor with God, God exists in the third heavens. He supersedes. He's the Lord of all spirits. He's supreme. He's everywhere. Actually, he has access to all things. He can go, he already took the keys of death, hell, and the grave. Like everything belongs to God. And so if you allow God to be the one who initiates these things, you allow God to be the one who takes you and shows you, then you're completely safe. You're completely safe because you're not willing yourself like the Tower of Babel, where they're willing themselves and they're creating technologies and they're trying to, through human effort, enter into a spiritual plane in which they don't have authority, nor do they have access. And Jesus talked about this. He says, listen, if anyone tries to enter into the kingdom of God in any other way other than coming through the door, and Jesus says, I am the door. I'm the way, the truth, and the life. I'm the door. If anyone tries to get in another way, they're a thief. So the book of Revelation says that John, when he's in his ecstatic encounter with the glorified Christ, he's going deeper and deeper into his encounter. There's layers, there's dimensions of his experience. And in I believe it's chapter 4, he says, I looked up and behold, I saw a door open. And a voice said, come up here. And the implication is that John is taken through this door. And when he's taken through this door that's standing open in heaven, he's brought into this place. And from there, just read the rest of the book. It's crazy. But this is what that tells me. It tells me that, yes, Jesus is the door, but he's open. This is why the Bible says the veil was torn in the temple. In other words, God, heaven, the access is open for anybody. It's open. If you come through Christ, if you enter through the door, Jesus said, listen, I'm the door. And he proved when he was crucified and he died, the temple veil was torn. What does that mean? What was the purpose of the veil? The veil was to actually separate the glory of God, the presence of God, from everybody else and from anything else. And the only people that could enter into that Holy of Holies was the high priest once a year. So it was very secluded. So when Jesus ripped the veil, when the veil was torn from top to bottom, in symbolizing that God was the initiator, top to bottom, when he tore the veil, the significance of that is astronomical. It's cosmic. It is destiny. It is reality changing. What does it mean? It means that Jesus is saying, look, I am the new and living way to God. And that door is not secluded to a priest class that can only come into my presence, that holy of holies, once a year. But now you can enter through me. And if you believe in me and you come to me and you pass through me, the door, you have access to God the Father, to heavenly treasure, to beautiful and wonderful and glorious things. And anyone can come. And he says this, God so loved the world that he gave his only son, that whoever believes in Jesus, whoever, will not perish, but you'll receive everlasting life. And what does John go on to say? What is everlasting life? That we would know you, the one true God, and Jesus Christ, whom you've sent. So what is everlasting life? It's pure relationship with the Godhead. And Jesus is saying, listen, if you want to enter into this, you come through me. And what does it mean to come through Jesus? It means to believe in him, to receive in him, to accept him, who he is, what he did, the reality that he bore our sins. He was resurrected from the dead. He lives forevermore. and he went through the veil into the heavenly sanctuary, and he opened the door behind him and he said, "Follow me." This is what he said to his disciples, right? He said, "I go to a place and I prepare a place for you." And one of the disciples is like, "Lord, just tell us where you're going and show us the way." And Jesus answers him and he says, "Okay, so you want to know where I'm going? I'm going to my Father." And he's like, "Well, like how do you get to your Father?" And then Jesus says, "I am the way, I am the truth and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me." So he answers his disciple and he says this, "Look, the destination is the presence of the Father. And the way you get there is through the door." And Jesus is saying, "I'm the way. I'm the way to the Father. I'm preparing a place for you in the presence of the Father, and the way you get there is through me." And Jesus warns and he says, if anyone tries to access that place, that presence, that sonship, any other way outside of Jesus, they're a thief. So it is the most salvation is the most exclusionary inclusion. And here's why. Jesus says, you want salvation, you want everlasting life, you want to know God? Cool. There's one way. It's me. But he says, but anyone can come. Whoever believes. So it's the most open invitation through the narrowest road, who is Christ. But it's like a hourglass. It's the narrowest invitation, and when you come down to the eye of that needle, it's so narrow that it's Jesus is the only way. Like no good works, no good deeds can get you in. No amount of confessions or repentance or the Hail Marys can get you in. No giving to the poor can get you in. It's pure trust in the life, death, resurrection, ascension, existence of Jesus Christ. And once you pass through that and you enter through Jesus and you go through a co-crucifixion, a co-burial, a co-resurrection, a co-ascension with Christ, then when you enter onto the other side of that hourglass, you are in the broadest way. David said it this way. He said, your commandment is broad. It's broad. Jesus said you can go in and out of the pasture now. You have freedom to go in and out. He says that God the Father desires to give you all the kingdom. And this is back into the Edenic state of being where he says you can of every tree of the garden you may freely eat, minus that one, but the abundance. And so you come through the narrow way and you enter into the abundance on the other side. And now you're in the land of grace. So this isn't just a matter of everlasting life and salvation. It also is matched over into spiritual, either spiritual practices or if they're not in God, demonic practices. So when I talk about astral projection, when I talk about remote viewing, when I talk about the Tower of Babel, when I talk about CERN, what they're trying to do in CERN, when I talk about this particle cloud, who knows the schemes and the desires of not only the devil and his angels, but of people who have given themselves over to dark forces. We know that in CERN, they've talked about potentially opening up a portal and either letting something into our realm or actually sending something through to the other realm. We just that's a fact. So when Aaron Rodgers talked about that, I thought it was funny because I didn't experience those warlocks. Why? Because I was gaining access through the Spirit of God. And the Bible says the earth is the Lord's and the fullness thereof, the world and all those who dwell therein. The Bible in the book of Psalms says all are servants of the Lord. Everyone serves the Lord, whether they hate God or love God. The devil hates God, but he served God's ultimate purpose. How? Because Jesus said, without the shedding of blood, there is no forgiveness of sins. And so he decided before the foundation of the world that he, if mankind rebelled, he would go as a substitution. He would actually lay his life down and allow himself to be killed, to be martyred for the forgiveness of sins. So that was his idea. Like the crucifixion was Jesus's idea if man sinned. The cross doesn't belong to Satan. That's the cross of Jesus. That's his cross. That's his idea. So when the devil was vicious and had bloodlust and was bloodthirsty and was inspiring all these soldiers and the Jews, and they were whipping him and beating him and all these things. The Bible says there's no forgiveness of sins without the shedding of blood. So the devil thought he was taking care of the problem. He thought he was burying the problem, killing the problem. But from the perspective of Yahweh, the creator, the all-knowing God, the one who's all-powerful, who has foreknowledge and who has who holds he inhabits eternity. He's outside of time and space. He's never not been. And he's already in the future. The future in God's eyes has already been accomplished. Hence we have the book of Revelation. So what does God do? The devil serves God. So God uses the violence of the devil in order to brutalize Jesus. Why? So that blood would be spilled out of Jesus. Why? So that there would be the forgiveness of sins. So the devil was so bloodthirsty and so possessed in deception and darkness that he did not realize that he was releasing mercy to all mankind. The devil was the agent of God's mercy. The Bible says all serve the Lord. Whether you like it or whether you don't, whether you love him or whether you don't, all serve God. And God owns everything. So God has access to Area 51. That's what I'm trying to say. So, ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for watching. I'm Anthony Leong. This is Anthology. And until the next chapter, Godspeed.